Hello, everyone. Welcome to Preservation of Legal Information, Critical Analysis, and Collaborative Tools. Today's presentations will look at emerging problems with preserving legal information and tools to help librarians manage their collections. Our first speaker today is Michelle Polchow, head of the Electronic Resources Management Unit at the University of California, Davis.
Thank you, Michelle, for having invited me to this panel. And I'm honored to speak to law librarians, which is not my forte, but in addition to being the electronic resources librarian, I sit on the ISSN International Center's Technical Advisory Committee, and I'm part of the NASIG Digital Preservation Committee. So I found myself working in the space of considering electronic resources and how they will be preserved for the future to ensure that they're available for scholarship at some point beyond the life of a file. There we go. I think today's topic is pretty broad, and I'm going to narrow in on some tools. So I think probably some of the problems will be focused on after I speak. But the Keepers Registry currently is a global monitor on the preservation coverage of electronic serials, and also by its absence highlights journal content that is at risk of loss. The Keepers Registry portal can be used on an individual basis to look up a serial, and can be looked up by ISSN or title. And the Keepers Registry symbol, the little K, has an indicator that there is indeed a keeper for this. If the article does not have a K, that indicates that the Keepers Registry has no record of it being preserved by a third-party agency. The archival status within the dashboard has an indicator that the title, in this case, the Journal of Legal Education, has been preserved. The keeper is the Internet Archive, and the dates of coverage that they have preserved are from 1981 to 2007. It will indicate the last time that there has been any action taken by the keeper. So in this case, it would have been April of 2024. So the list of keepers, the Technical Advisory Committee reviews applications to become a keeper, and each of the keepers have a full description on the Keepers Registry. Keepers, I know I put my source in pretty fine print there, keepers.issn.org/keepers. So there's a full description of each of these entities that have currently been approved. And there is a specific section that indicates what the access to content rights are by any given library. So in general terms, the conditions under which a library can access the content archived for each initiative. You'll notice in this list that there are national libraries, so they may or may not have an option for a library to request content. So currently, I started using their new platform, which has a few more tools on it. And not being familiar with the full slate of law journals, the Duke Forum for Law and Social Change shows that they do have some content in progress that is going to be preserved with the CLOCKS archive, and then that there is some current content that they had already preserved. So most likely they're taking a look at their content and seeing that they can go back and maybe cover print if it had been digitized. So the Keepers Registry filtering function that I did for law, just the term law, I found that there were 43 titles that Portico has. The first box with the red arrow, and the Portico, to give an example of what access to library content might look like, Portico makes available open access content to everyone after what they call a trigger event. And a trigger event usually looks like a company going out of business, a journal ceasing publication, but the Portico will then take over being the host or platform party to that content. If content that was previously subscribed to is triggered, then that institution must provide evidence of subscribed coverage in order to access that content. In addition, Portico is unusual in that they offer post-cancellation access, which would be different than if a journal goes out of publication or a company goes out of business. But if a library determines they're no longer going to subscribe and their agreement allowed for post-cancellation, Portico might fulfill that role for a publishing access point. On the other side, the 64 results for CLOCKSS archive. CLOCKSS is a dark archive, and once a trigger event happens, everything is open access, and CLOCKSS operates as a membership organization for them to sustain their product, and the Portico also has a subscription, but it's by library membership. So two different funding models as well for these agencies to cover the file management as things age out. So quickly, to have some takeaways for today's session for my portion, there's actions that libraries can take, and one, I think, is to clearly identify digital preservation roles in your organization that support long-term access to e-journals. It enables library staff to become an active part of a keeper's community, and it uses your expertise to identify the most important titles and classes of content at risk for your individual libraries, for law libraries in general, for libraries just holistically as we have more and more content be born digital. I think the other thing is you can join an archiving organization as Portico, become a member if that looks like it's a good fit for your library's content, and then also to be able to continue to have access to that journal content should something happen. The other part is to make sure that journals that your university publishes are being archived. The license agreement, LibLicense, if anyone does licensing, has recently updated the portion of about digital preservation, and there is some language there to consider incorporating into your licenses. When discussing with a vendor what they're currently doing, who they're depositing with, the conversation may even lead to we don't do this, and you would need to make a case for why this is an important portion of service that your library needs. The research libraries can also take an action to create awareness within your community and to kind of dive down into your own data. So one would be to look at your library catalog, your journal holdings, and see what all you have there. I'll show a comparison to what I did to analyze ours when we assessed our journal collection. And then again, if your library is publishing any type of content digitally, you would want to look at those practices as well. So as a member of NASIG's Digital Preservation Committee, we have a model digital preservation policy that can give you some background on what things you may want your publisher to be doing in order to make your content deliverable into the future. The other guides kind of break down what is digital preservation. Does that mean that someone just keeps it on a hard drive and sends it to you, or are they actually reformatting files as formats age out and need to be redigitized? Agencies may have a dozen different geographic locations to ensure that a server is not at risk from climate change activities or failure, and that there's a lot of replication. Then we also have talking points handout for talking to a publisher about digital preservation, and then a guide to the Keepers Registry. We also did a report back in 2019 and found that there really was not a lot of attention being paid to the long-term care and access to scholarly content. In the time that I've been working with the ISSN Center, they have created not just the portal where you can look up individual titles, but you can submit an entire spreadsheet of your collection and have it return a variety of information that is in relationship to not only who is a digital preservation holder. We also found that there were a lot of data discrepancies, that we had some ISSN numbers that were not valid in the ISSN Center, which led to some data cleanup. And of course, you know, if there's incorrect ISSN numbers, that also affects the ability to use an open URL to find the content. So I did an analysis of Davis's collection and submitted about 208,000 journal ISSN numbers. From that, they found that 190,000 were valid. And then there were about 1,200 invalid numbers. At the end of the day, about 59,000 titles were in the Keepers Registry. So that looks like about 40% of our journal titles in the UC collection have at least one keeper. It was not surprising, but it also is frightening that so much content can be at risk. And again, this is totally at the title level. We did not even get into the journal coverage of what issues and what pages are in a keeper's inventory. So I'm going to close with the keeper's rule of three. Ideally, as I said, ours only had one keeper, 40% had one keeper. Ideally, you would want three, and this is based on the economics of digital preservation, that we know there's a finite budget. Some stuff will be eventually lost, but each additional copy improves safekeeping. And there is a cost-effective point where replication is no longer really improving the situation. So 3 again is that indicator. And again, the indicator of safekeeping is not an assurance against loss. And I'll also close with 2 other things: that deferring reliance on interlibrary loan or exclusive access through a publisher's platform is a very high-risk proposition. And post-cancellation access is really a short-term business model, and it should not be confused with an enduring scholarly record accessible through a third-party agency. And so with that, I hope that gives you some tools and some examples of how we did our analysis to see what our digital future might look like. So Michelle, I'll pass it back over to you.
Our next speaker is Michelle Trumbo, Executive Director of the Legal Information Preservation Alliance.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. I'm excited to share with you how collaborative print retention projects are helping law libraries preserve critical legal resources while maintaining access and usability. Before we dive in, I'd like you to take a moment to imagine something with me. Imagine a world where critical legal materials are no longer accessible, not because they're outdated or irrelevant, but because they simply no longer exist in physical form. That might seem far-fetched sitting here today in 2024, but this scenario is becoming a very alarming reality. Over the past decade, law libraries have been rapidly downsizing their print collections, as we all know, and the ABA's recent relaxation of standards around maintaining core physical collections has only accelerated this trend. The result is going to be irreversible losses of physical legal materials that are critical for research, teaching, and even ensuring justice. These losses are more than an inconvenience. They threaten scholarly integrity, transparency in the foundations of our legal system. If these kinds of materials become inaccessible, our ability to verify legal precedent, maintain the scholarly record, and uphold the rule of law is all at risk. And that's where collaborative projects such as PalmPrint come in. Today, I'm going to use that to discuss how these kinds of collaborative initiatives can address these challenges by preserving and maintaining and ensuring accessibility of these materials. So over the next few minutes, we're going to explore three key questions. What are the actual risks of losing physical legal materials? How do collaborative print retention projects mitigate these risks? And finally, what broader lessons can we learn from this type of preservation model? To truly understand the importance of collaborative preservation projects, we first need to consider the broader context of the preservation crisis facing law libraries today. Over the past decade, law libraries have undergone a significant transformation. Increasing reliance on digital resources has led to widespread discarding of physical materials. And increasingly, libraries are embracing access over ownership models, which prioritize space and convenience over long-term preservation. The new ABA standards that no longer require libraries to maintain a physical collection has accelerated this process. And while this whole evolution might seem like a logical adaptation to the digital age, it has justified massive weeding projects which leave physical collections, which have been the historic backbone of preservation efforts, rapidly shrinking. And while digital access certainly has its benefits, both to patrons and libraries, these trends come with challenges. So let's break them down a little bit. First, there's the permanent destruction of unique or rare texts. Many of these materials are unlikely to ever be digitized, either due to copyright restrictions, cost, or lack of awareness of their value. Even when such texts are digitized, preservation isn't guaranteed because digital collections face risks like file corruption, platform obsolescence, and restricted access tied to licensing. Second, digital materials are increasingly controlled by the publishers. Paywalls and licensing terms limit their access and undermine the library's traditional role as an independent steward of knowledge. And finally, these trends disrupt the essential function of libraries. Without physical copies, interlibrary loan systems can fail or weaken, and scholars lose the ability to verify historical records. Worse yet, when key legal materials become inaccessible to the public, even the rule of law itself can be undermined. All of these challenges really highlight the critical need for initiatives like PalmPrint. By preserving physical materials and ensuring their accessibility, we can address these risks and protect the foundational role of law libraries in safeguarding legal knowledge. So let's take a minute to explore how collaboration can help combat these challenges. Preserving America's Legal Materials in Print, also known as PalmPrint, is a shared collection of U.S. federal and state primary legal materials. The repository focuses on preserving critical legal materials for future generations and acts as a safety net for print materials that individual libraries may no longer be able to maintain and cite. Just to give you a little bit of context and background, Palm Print began as a collaborative effort between LIPA and NELCO. The project was initially conceived as a 3-year pilot program with the goal of proving that a shared discipline-specific collection could actually work. And it did. The idea of a collection of legal materials jointly owned by the sponsoring organizations and the participating libraries has been sustained for over a decade now. This collaborative structure is at the heart of Palm Print's success. It allows us as a community to preserve vital legal materials while keeping the cost manageable for libraries of all sizes. Palm Print is designed as a circulating light archive, which means that it strives to balance preservation with accessibility. Unlike traditional archives that restrict access to preserved materials, Palm Print allows member libraries to obtain these resources either in the physical volume itself or electronically when needed. All of the materials in the collection, and there are about 65,000 individual items, are housed in an archival grade facility in Windsor, Connecticut, which helps ensure their long-term preservation in a stable and temperature-controlled environment. Member libraries can request resources through an online password-protected system, and they can choose between physical volumes shipped directly to their library for temporary use or digital scans delivered electronically for quick access to specific sections or pages. Palm Print operates on a subscription model, which makes it cost-effective for libraries of all budgets. Currently, Palm Print is supported by 60 member libraries, and that has created a very robust and sustainable network to help preserve and share these materials. This collaborative approach helps make sure that the longevity of these resources is maintained and that any library who's interested can also participate. Going forward, Palm Print's efforts are focused on developing the collection by identifying and filling gaps in the existing materials and choosing areas in which to expand the collection. A few years ago, we hired a project librarian to analyze collection gaps. Throughout that process, she identified missing volumes and items that needed to be filled in Palm Print's collection and gathered an incredible amount of data. As a side task, she also began improving the catalog records by filling in details that were missing, such as truncated titles, incomplete volume numbers, and missing years. And that has helped make Palm Print and its catalog more complete and user-friendly. Looking ahead, LIPA, NELCO, and Palm Print's newly formed Collection Development Advisory Board are identifying and prioritizing areas for strategic collection growth. So how does this all tie in? So as we've talked about, the challenges facing libraries today are significant, from the loss of physical materials to disruptions in library functions. These issues demand innovative solutions, and collaborative print collections provide a solution. First, they can consolidate resources from multiple institutions into centralized archives. Collaborative print collections prevent the permanent loss of critical materials. This approach ensures that important materials are preserved even as individual libraries may be forced to downsize their physical holdings. Second, shared print collections strengthen interlibrary loan systems. With a centralized repository for physical materials, participating libraries maintain access to resources they may no longer be able to keep locally. This helps sustain the viability of ILL as an essential service for our library patrons. Third, collaborative print collections uphold the integrity of the scholarly record. Physical copies are essential for verifying historical materials that might be incomplete, altered, or inaccessible in digital formats. Ensuring that these resources are preserved allows scholars to maintain accuracy and reliability in their work. And finally, shared print collections play a crucial role in supporting transparency and accountability. By preserving foundational texts, whether legal, historical, or academic in nature, these kinds of initiatives help ensure access to knowledge, underpinning justice, scholarship, and the public trust. In closing, collaborative print collections are more than a practical solution. They are a safeguard against the risks of losing our shared knowledge. PalmPrint is a great example of how shared collections, repositories, and retention agreements for print materials can effectively address some of the financial and logistical challenges of preservation. By pooling resources, libraries can preserve critical materials without bearing the full cost or responsibility individually. This general model has clear potential for broader application. Collaboration helps ensure that no vital resources are lost to time or circumstances. Another key takeaway from PalmPrint and projects like it is the importance of balancing physical and digital preservation efforts. While digital collections are valuable for accessibility and convenience, physical materials serve as a necessary backup, providing long-term stability and redundancy. Some reasons why the balance between physical and digital preservation is crucial is that digital-only reliance comes with significant risk. If we had licensing disputes or platform failures, these can abruptly cut off our access to key resources. Digital files, of course, are also vulnerable to obsolescence as formats or technologies evolve, which could leave collections vulnerable. And finally, physical materials ensure that we have a reliable foundation to fall back on even as technology changes and evolves. So what can law libraries do to address these challenges? Here are a few important steps. Advocate for participation. Support collaborative preservation initiatives like PalmPrint to ensure that these materials remain accessible to the communities that rely on them. Encourage long-term thinking. Work with other library administrators, stakeholders, and policymakers to prioritize long-term preservation strategies over short-term cost savings. This is basically the investment we make today protects the knowledge of tomorrow. And finally, I think we all need to embrace our ethical responsibility. As stewards of cultural and legal heritage, libraries have a profound obligation to safeguard these materials for future generations. This responsibility transcends budgets and timelines. It's really central to our mission, and maybe if we think about it, is probably our only mission that we should be concerned about. And with that, I will turn it back over to Michelle Pope.
All right, our next speaker is Amy Wood, Director of Discovery and Technology at the Center for Research Libraries.
Well, I'm really pleased to be a part of this discussion today. I would say I think the shared print community has been waiting about a decade to re-engage with you. As Michelle mentioned, you all have been focused on PalmPrint for about a decade, but you all were really instrumental in some of the early conversations that we had around shared print. And as a community, as a movement, shared print has grown so much over the past decade that we would really welcome your involvement again, because the discipline-specific focus is so important, but the need for this material really goes beyond those discipline-specific users, and there are a lot of ways and opportunities for, I would call it, sort of the general shared print programs to buoy what you all are doing, and to be able to, with PalmPrint, and to be able to really ensure, as Michelle said, that the material remains accessible in the future. So I just wanted to say, so my son and daughter, their high school has a tradition of clapping in the new class. So I'm just going to ask everybody to imagine that the shared print community is clapping you in, and we really welcome learning from you and working with you. So originally the idea is that we're talking about tools, but paper as an important tool for collection management is really, I I don't want to say nothing without the community, but it is everything with the community. It is so integral with the community that I'm really going to highlight both aspects. They're really one can't separate them. So I just ask you to also imagine, that you are at your desk and you are considering all of those collection challenges that Michelle mentioned, and it may feel very immediate. These, we've never faced these challenges before, but really we have been, we really have been dealing with a lot of these issues for over 100 years. So this picture is from 1901, and really all of the sort of histories of collective action around collection management always go back to about 1902, when there was when there's really a call to the libraries to deal with the problem of finite resources and seemingly infinite collections to acquire and to manage. So to explain how paper and shared print really got their foundations as a tool, as a movement, as a community, we really look back to the late 1990s. So perhaps some of the real stressors that you all are feeling in the law community were very immediate for the general serials librarians at the time. So there was just it was the 1990s. There were decades of just an explosion of serial publications, skyrocketing costs, uncertainties about the long-term value, which kind of led to building comprehensive collections. Hard to make a decision and really focus on specific titles. So let's get as much as we can at every library, and also changing pedagogical approaches were influencing library space and reducing where those collections could live safely. And digitization, as you all have pointed out too, digitization was seen as a solution to the economic problems of serials, of access, and even for preservation. But there weren't any guardrails and really things that we could mitigate risk. We just didn't have a long-term idea of what did that mean for really accessing and that content in the future. So this is where paper and the shared print community come in to help answer some of these questions and these challenges. So both, so paper and shared print both have their roots in that the 2001 Council of Library and Information Resources Task Force report titled "The Evidence in Hand," the report of the task force on the artifact in library collections. So they dealt with all sorts of formats, but I'll just focus on what their recommendations were for print collections. And that was that there should be regional repositories that help reduce that redundancy. There should be a national repository of records so that we know, even if the regional repository copies get damaged, we've always got that national repository. There's standardized practices, common metadata standards and a tool in which that metadata can live that's freely accessible so that everyone knows what's there. The need for raising awareness, advocacy, expanding funding, and investing in innovation. And, the interesting thing about the expanding funding is we did rely a lot on grants in the early years. But when I think back to that sort of 1901, 1902 era, there were stakeholders at the very top level of universities, not just the libraries, but the universities. And I would say that's part of the crisis that we're experiencing now, is that our stakeholder base has diminished. And a lot of the work of this and a lot of the importance of this is left to sort of those functional librarians across the life cycle, but still at perhaps not a level of which can make budgetary decisions. So in looking at these recommendations, you can see, papers right there in that standardized practice. That's that metadata, that's that freely accessible tool. But the shared print community really has just taken off. So those regional repositories, those were thought of as, collaborations of libraries in various parts of the country. But there wasn't this idea that we were actually working across those regional repositories. And that's where the shared print community has really made what I think of this as the shared print movement. And they've reduced that need for the national repository of record, which, although aspirational, I think many of us would, as defined as a single place where all of this lives, I think is impossible. So the work of the shared print community to make sure that there is a national repository, however distributed, is absolutely on top of mind for them. Raising awareness, advocacy, finding funding, really pushing innovation. These are all those things that the shared print community has done, and frankly, which no tool on its own can do. However, as a tool, as a platform, paper can be that place where the shared print community and libraries who maybe are curious about the shared print community but have not yet gotten involved can find that information. So exactly what is paper? So paper is a freely available platform to support, originally, determined, it was to support decision-making for print serials collections. So really kind of a very focused, purposeful, this is what it's for. Find your data, download your data, use your data, check it against your own data. But I think one of the strengths of paper is it doesn't just expose the serial titles and holdings, but it highlights the collaborative commitments and the shared print programs in those networks of trust that have really built this movement and built a real store of expertise around this material. So with that, I will dig down into paper and show you a little bit. And I have to say, so paper, it has CRL's old branding. And so this is definitely an old version of paper. And I'm so excited to be able to say we are migrating to a new system this year that will be much more robust and be much more dynamic and have many opportunities to serve the community in a better way. Nonetheless, here is one of the strengths of paper, and we'll continue in the next version. It's a comprehensive list of the shared print programs as we know about them, as people alert us to them. This is the place. Shared print programs are not all the same. This is the place where someone is curious. Is this a program I want to get involved with? Is this a program I can trust? Is this, do I like the way they validate the material? This is the place where you can go to find that and then make those connections to the particular programs that would really advance the work at your local library. So here's some of the detailed information that we provide about the programs, if they're still operational or if they have completed their work, what type of archive they are, because we do include digital archives in paper as well. Ownership, staffing models. Then there are links out to their MOUs that are really integral to their programs and their member list. And I imagine that many of your home institutions, the libraries, are involved in some of these programs. So exposing this is really critical to some of the issues that Michelle brought up about mitigating risk. So you want to know, it's not just that a library holds this material, but what level of validation are they doing? Are they, are they checking at just the title level? Or are they checking each volume? Are they checking each issue? Are they actually doing page validation? This is the kind of information that you can find in paper. And here's just an example of one of the titles, and it's sort of combined or aggregated holdings. So really at a glance, you can see, well, this title and these holdings are held at CRL. And I know that what kind of archive CRL is because I saw the information that was on the previous page. The Harvard HathiTrust has copies. So you really can see and make decisions in your own library about this material. And if you would dig down, I wanted to sort of limit the number of slides I had, but if you dig down into each one of these holdings, you would be able to see validation level and missing copies, damaged, information about damaged copies. And that really helps you make your decisions. I mentioned that it's really powerful when we can supplement the work of each other. So it's absolutely critical that you have a discipline-specific program. You know the material better than others. But but this material is important to other programs as well. But how can we differentiate the work that we do from the work that you all do? And as you can see, there are 13,000 plus titles in paper that at least have an LC class within the law, but 82 institutions that have titles. Now, some may only have one title, but so is this an area that we can collaborate to really make this less sort of serendipitous, I think, for the general community? Are there areas where you'd like another program to take the lead on? That would be, that's a place where paper can really help. So, and the final thing I want to point out for paper functionality is this collection comparison tool. So this was, I would say, gifted to paper by the California Digital Libraries. They created it for their own tool for the West shared print program. As far as I know, it is the only freely available tool that would allow you to upload a list of OCLC numbers or a list of ISSNs and immediately get back a comparison of what is in all of the other shared print programs, or what has not been committed to a program and therefore should be at the top of your list to retain yourself. It's, as I said, California Digital Libraries was gifted this to paper, and I think that really shows the involvement of the community and the dedication of the community to sharing data, to sharing information, to really and sharing innovation and continuing to move us forward as a community. So paper's future. As I mentioned, we're migrating to sort of a modern, robust platform that will have much more metadata allowed in there. In the database, there'll be opportunities for much more unmediated access to the data, not just a tool like the one that's currently in paper, but much more robust ways of getting data out. There are opportunities for, I think, for even very dedicated members to make changes in the database. So we're really hoping that this takes paper with this concept of being a platform, a connector of programs, a connector of libraries, of people, and not just a destination to find out data, but really a place that gathers the community. And there's an opportunity to explore including monographs in that. It's clear. So the crisis of the 90s might have been the serials, but the crisis expands. So does paper. So I have some resources, and I think before I share the slides for everyone, I'll add a couple of more resources, but I think these are really helpful as we move forward. And as I said at the beginning, we're clapping you in. We're hoping we all look forward to engaging with you more about the law material and about all of what we know in shared print, all of the lessons we've learned about number of copies, ideal metadata, and tips and tricks for advocacy, and many, many more things. Thank you very much again, and I think I hand it over to David.
Our next speaker is David C. Walker, Director of the Schaefer Law Library, Albany Law School.
I'm going to take the approach of looking at copyright laws and libraries and the Constitution and seeing if we're really what the future of the progress of the useful arts and sciences may or may not be. So I'm going to start off with this. I found this online. My girlfriend regularly tells me if free public libraries didn't already exist and someone tried to invent them, they would be condemned as a socialist plot. And I think about that a lot. I kind of agree. Should the idea of a library have been invented in the 21st century, there probably would not be no such thing as a library, at least in America. But I don't think we would have an internet had there been no libraries. I don't think that we would have a lot of things without the existence of libraries. And I contend that we wouldn't have the legal system that we have now, but for the advent of libraries. We do have libraries. That's good news for all of us, I think. We have had libraries in one form or another for the last 5,000 years. Libraries have been deeply rooted in the American tradition. Ben Franklin, among others, started the first free public lending library in Philadelphia in 1731. We have copyright laws too. The framers saw to that. Congress was granted the power to achieve a specific end by a specific means to promote the progress of the useful arts and sciences by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. So let's all be textualists. Let's see that the underlying purpose of copyright in America is not the granting of monopolies, but rather to promote the progress of the useful arts and sciences. Well, how did so the copyright laws would have an end to promote the progress of the useful arts and sciences, but so do libraries. I'm pretty sure that that is our underlying point of existence. One important distinction between libraries and copyright laws is that libraries can exist without legislation, copyright laws cannot. So how do libraries promote the progress of useful arts and sciences? Well, we collect information, we preserve information, we circulate information. How did Congress decide to promote the useful arts, to promote the progress of the useful arts and sciences? Well, they gave authors rights to their respective writings. Authors have rights, as they should, and those rights are listed in 17 U.S.C. 106. This is just a few rights that I've articulated, but some of the rights include the right to reproduce the copyrighted work in copies or phono records, the right to prepare derivative works based upon the copyrighted work, the right to distribute copies or phonographs of the copyrighted work to the public by sale or other transfer of ownership or by rental, lease, or lending. Those rights are limited, however, and some of those limitations recognize the work that a library must do in order to function. While not really a library exemption, authors have a right to the fire, but not the matches, which is to say, when you buy a book, you own it. You can read it, you can catalog it, you can place it in a shelf, you can let others read it, you can lend it, you can trade it, you can sell it, you can burn it. The copy is yours, and you might be a library. You can put a book in a glass case in a temperature-controlled room deep inside the bowels of the earth, but then that doesn't make it accessible. That wouldn't help help in the progress of the useful arts and sciences. But Congress recognized, I think, in part, the role of libraries in preserving works. So although you as a general member of the public generally cannot copy a book, libraries can make a copy of a book subject to specific limitations under the Copyright Act. And those limitations include that the reproduction cannot have any direct or indirect commercial advantage. The library collections must be open to the public, or at least open to researchers researching a specialized field who are not affiliated with the library, and also that you provide proper notice of the copyright. Congress even recognized the value of interlibrary loan. Libraries can even lend copies of individual articles from journals and the like to other libraries subject to CONTU guidelines. And we won't really get into the CONTU guidelines, but that was part of the legislative history. You can make a copy of digital works that are unpublished or deteriorating, but for some reason, even though you can lend copies of the books you bought, you don't have a statutory right to have the copy of a digital work be accessed outside the libraries, the walls of your library. Moreover, terms and licensing agreements can supersede a library's ability to preserve and make information in digital form. Publishers have been having a cow about technology since the beginning of the 20th century. Publishers balked at the notion that it was legal to take a photograph of a page of a book when the photographic camera was invented. Courts allowed it. Publishers balked at photocopiers in library. Courts allowed it. In each instance, publishers continued to make money, and the useful arts and sciences progressed. Publishers balked at libraries making digital copies. Congress said, well, I mean, you could leave it in the library if you make a copy, and only in certain instances. So when we buy a book in print, we have considerable latitude in what we can do in terms of preservation and making it accessible. But in the digital world, not so much. I think this also reflects the fact that Congress saw the library as a physical place, not one without walls. We seem to be moving deeper into a world without walls, though. What's worse is that we seem to be moving to a world where we aren't sold anything anymore. We're slowly being reduced to renters. When we rent, the license agreement controls what we can do with that information, with those information assets, subject to the provisions of the contract being legal. Maybe the agreement says we can't lend. Maybe we have an allotment of registrants to the access to the information for a limited time for particular purposes. Maybe we have to read it within a certain period of time. Magically, the form of the information asset has changed what you can do with the information. So the veil between print and digital content seems pretty thin, if you ask me, but there's significant legal differences. We don't necessarily acquire information assets to read them for the information per se. Sometimes we do, but sometimes we don't. Sometimes we acquire them because someone cited them, and we need to verify the veracity of the information purported by the author's work that cited the information. There's Corbin on contracts, Williston on contracts, Farnsworth on contracts. Why do I need all these contracts treaties? I can get the gist of contracts from just one. One reason is that we treat the works of legal scholars as legal authorities sometimes. That's explicit in international law, and it's implicit in American law. Another reason is because courts cite them, and sometimes judicial opinions form the body of American law, so we need to be able to verify opinions for accuracy and also context. So at the heart of American law is a web of interrelated information resources. Judicial opinions alone include citations to other cases, statutes, regulations, and often secondary sources like treatises. To know the law, we need to have access to all of them. So you see here in Cohen versus the United States that the court cited both the works of Nimmer and Partridge to arrive at their decision. The courts rely on legal scholars as a legal authority, and essentially in many cases, what they do with the legal authorities is they render an opinion which may, in some cases, form the body of law under various rules regarding stare decisis. Here's another example where the court relied on the works of Corbin and Wilson and McCormick and Thompson to explain the nature of the contract at issue and what that meant as in terms of breach. So copyrighted works sometimes make up the body of our law. Access to the law is essential to due process. It is essential to our constitutional republic, also known as democracy. In his 1964 work, The Morality of Law, Lon Fuller determined that 8 principles need to be in play for a legal system to function. These 8 principles represented the morality of the law. A total failure of any one of these 8 principles results into something which cannot be considered a legal system in Fuller's view. One of these principles is that the law must be widely promulgated or publicly available. If information is not accessible, it can't be widely promulgated. Law libraries have been the conservators of legal information for over a century. If we can't do it, that means publishers have to. And if they don't preserve information and provide reasonable access to that information, the information that sometimes forms the body of the law becomes lost. If we are able to maintain, if we're going to maintain the status quo of using legal information in the administration of our justice system, we need to be able to access that information. And that is the most apparent and significant value of things like interlibrary loan. My library doesn't collect a whole lot of oil and gas law. New York isn't yet known as a big oil and gas state. We do collect in a wide number of areas, though, like environmental law, for example, in case my dean's watching. Luckily, in a print legal environment, I can borrow a needed oil and gas treatise on the off chance that one of my users needs it, subject to the CONTU guidelines. And I can lend one of the many environmental law treatises to a library who has a user who needs it, even though the treatise would not be regularly used. In a digital legal information environment, it would seem that my ability to borrow and lend from peer libraries can be limited by the nature of the contractual transaction I engaged in with the publisher. So imagine a world much like the one we live in, where there are, in this case, no more print books, where access to information is limited to specific persons for specific times, for specific purposes. Imagine a world where there are no more vinyl records, no more cassette tapes, no more compact discs. A world where you have to pay a monthly fee to stream music or to watch movies or to read books. We are moving closer to a world without print, without ownership. Digital access to information has its benefits. It's easier for users to access it. They don't need to get out of their chair and walk anywhere. They don't need to be in a public place with other people. It also saves space. Digital information takes up almost no physical space. But imagine what else that means. Schaefer Law Library has 53,000 square feet of physical space. Imagine how many faculty offices, law journal offices, student spaces we can fit in that square footage. I hope my dean's not watching. A digital legal information environment is certainly space saving, but can we afford it? And I posit not unless we have the power to preserve information, provide unfettered access to our users of those information resources, and be able to occasionally lend them to other libraries, subject to the CONTU guidelines. Whether in print or digital form, content is content. Yet it seems to some that we can restrict uses of material in digital form in ways in which we cannot restrict them in print form because they're in digital form. This makes no sense. Current copyright law on its face doesn't seem to make sense in this regard. Well, it makes sense. We're just not making sense of it. In the light of the coming perils, maybe we move back to print collections. The problem is that it seems that there's a digital creep plaguing the print world of legal information too. So the annotated version of New York's Code of Rules and Regulations is the official compilation of regulations in the state of New York. Its contents as the official version provide the courts with the ability to take judicial notice of the regulations contained therein pursuant to New York's CPLR. And the NYCRR is published by Thomson Reuters as a loose leaf. The problem we found in Albany Law and why we canceled our subscription to it, which I was loath to do, was that it was 2 years out of date at the time. And now it's more than 3 years out of date. And it wasn't just our volumes. The New York State Library also confirmed that theirs were out of date. And I understand how printing can be slow, but 3 years out of date of any official code of regulations that carry the force of law in the state in which I live, I think is a little too much. Now, Thomson Reuters does publish the New York Code of Rules online for free in an unofficial format with a disclaimer about, relying on it. But that was 2 years out of date too, and I checked yesterday and I did some searches and it seems to be 3 years out of date. The NCYRR is updated weekly online in Westlaw, in Lexis, in Fastcase, but in those cases you have to pay to access the updated information. I pay taxes. I should be able to at least go into the state library and find out what the law of the state in which I live in is. So going back to collecting a print isn't the solution if the information is not available. Assuming that the information becomes accessible only in digital form and behind a paywall, are our hands tied? Maybe, maybe not. I argue that law librarians are legal positivists. You want to know what the law is? You look it up. I love legal positivism. Hans Kelsen, H.L.A. Hart have a big place in my heart. Sometimes paper rules, to use Carl Llewellyn's terms, don't make sense. We have to make the paper rules make sense. As Rudolf von Jhering said, law has a purpose. As the framers said, the purpose of copyright is to promote the progress of the useful arts and sciences. Congress has the authority to promote the useful arts and sciences by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. As such, Congress can enact copyright legislation like the Copyright Act of 1976, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, and even the Sonny Bono Copyright Term Extension Act. But in doing so, it must promote the useful arts and sciences. What if copyright law impedes the progress of arts and sciences? What if it disparages the enumerated rights retained by the people? So I love the Ninth Amendment. It is a work of genius. It is probably my favorite part of the Constitution. It is a catch-all. It is a legal positivist codification of natural law. And natural law is the law of reason. The Ninth Amendment has a history, a legislative one, if you will. In that history, you will find a recognition by the framers that they couldn't figure out all the natural rights in one sitting. But that didn't mean that they didn't exist. The Ninth Amendment tells us that a man has a right not to remove his hat. It's in the legislative history. And the courts have pretty much left the Ninth Amendment alone. But if you're really an originalist and a textualist, Justice Thomas, you can't really ignore it. And there are many different theories about how to determine whether there is an actual right under the Ninth Amendment. And the most conservative and most prominent is to determine whether the right is deeply rooted in our history and tradition. Is the library deeply rooted in the history and tradition of the United States? Libraries are as American as Benjamin Franklin. So yes, I posit that there is a constitutional right to libraries. I posit that there is a constitutional right to know the law, which has also been the subject of 42 U.S.C. 1983 litigation. What would a constitutional right to libraries look like? I haven't fully worked that out, but I think it is important to at least look at the practices of the libraries established at the time of the founding. This would include collecting, preserving, and lending information assets. It would also likely include interlibrary loan, as Teresa Miguel Stearns has traced the practice of interlibrary loan to the 8th century. In any event, we have to be mindful of what we do and why we do it in developing our collections. So I leave you with some questions. Are we ready to completely give up print? If not, how do we make decisions between collecting in print versus digital? How do we communicate with our vendors about the terms of the licensing agreement and what we can walk away from and what we cannot? What do we tell our deans? What do we tell our faculty? What do we tell the judiciary specifically about what is available after they've cited something? What do we tell the public about access to legal information? Are we as a nation meeting the ends of the Copyright Clause? Or are we nearing the end of legal information? When will I stop talking? Now, I thank you for your time.